Good day, and welcome to Resus Property Consultancy Training video. Our special topic today is about the basic laws in the Philippine real estate, property taxes you need to know as a real estate sales professional. Mr. Kim, thank you so much for joining us in Resus.
Thank you for having me as well.
He is a licensed broker with more than 6 years of real estate marketing experience and a member of the Manila Board of Real Estate and a partner of Resus. Mr. Kim Ochoa. Moving forward, can you share with us what are the common real estate taxes which we need to know in buying a property during pre-selling and ready for occupancy?
So good thing you mentioned about taxes. So there are 4 main taxes that we need to consider. So let's discuss these taxes one by one. Let's start with the capital gains tax, or CGT. The CGT refers to tax paid for gains in the capital you invested. This assumes that the seller earns from the sale of the property by offering it at a higher cost than the acquisition cost. The capital gains tax is 6% of the selling price, zonal value, or fair market value, whichever is higher. It is very important to note that this tax should be on the seller's account. So let's try to illustrate how to compute for the capital gains tax. For instance, the selling price of a property you are buying is at 2 million pesos. If this price is higher than the fair market value as determined by the city assessor, or higher than the zonal value as declared by the Bureau of Internal Revenue or the BIR, then the basis of the 6% capital gains tax will be 2 million pesos. The CGT in this case is worth 120,000 pesos to be paid by the seller within 30 days of the consummation of the sale or the date of notarization of the deed of sale. It is important to take note that there's a deadline for each type of tax. The second important tax is the documentary stamp tax, or the DST. The DST is normally applied on the deed of absolute sale executed between the seller and the buyer. The documentary stamp tax is 1.5% of whichever is higher between the selling price or the fair market value or the zonal value of the property. The DST is an excise tax set for documents, papers, and instruments that evidence the acceptance, sale, and transfer of the property. The documentary stamp tax is paid for by the buyer. For a 2 million property, as an example, the DST here would be around 30,000 pesos. The documentary stamp tax is due to be paid 5th day of the next month from the date of the notarization of the deed of sale. Before we proceed with the other taxes, Ms. Vanessa, we need to take note that the capital gains tax and the documentary stamp tax should be paid to the BIR. Third, we have the transfer tax. This tax is paid when the title of the property is transferred from the seller to the buyer's name, which will signify the new ownership of the property through its sale. The amount involved here varies according to the location of the property, but generally it's between 0.5% to 0.75% of the selling price or the zonal value or fair market value, whichever value is higher. The transfer tax should be paid to the city treasurer's office, and this is due 60 days from the date of execution of sale. Next is the title registration fee. The final step is the registration of the title under the new owner, paid to the registry of deeds where the property is located. Prior to this, a buyer must secure the necessary tax clearances from the Bureau of Internal Revenue or the BIR. The amount to be paid varies, and the registration fees are usually specified in a published table, but generally around 0.25 of the selling price. The bottom line is that you as a buyer should spare a considerable amount of cash on top of what you paid for the property. This is to ensure that the processing of documents for what you purchased will be processed smoothly. The registration fee should be paid within 1 year from the release of the Certificate Authorizing Registry or the CAR released by the BIR. It can be extended to another 6 months upon approval of the BIR. Lastly, we have the real property tax. Under the Local Government Code of 1991 or the Republic Act 7160, homeowners for residential properties or property administrators for commercial properties are obliged to pay an annual real property tax to their local government unit or LGU. This is determined based on a fixed proportion of the value of the property. In here, Ms. Vanessa, There are some exemptions to the real property tax, which include government properties, charitable institutions, churches, cooperatives, and schools. For most cities and municipalities in Metro Manila, the real property tax is around 2% and 1% for the provinces. The assessed property value or the taxable value of the property is the fair market value multiplied by the assessment level. Maximum assessment level for residential property is 20%, while commercial and industrial property is 50%. Some cities have different tax rates, so it's best to personally check with your city treasurer's office. You know, Miss Vanessa, buying a home is a dream all of us want to achieve. But you know, purchasing is just half the battle, as the law requires supplementary taxes for your purchase in order to contribute to the country's national income. So this simply goes to show that buying and owning a home is a commitment you have to be prepared to take and face.
How about Maceda law? Can you discuss with us what we need to know about Maceda law?
Good thing you mentioned the Maceda law. Whether you are ready to finally buy the dream house or condominium, but you would like to be extra secured with your allotment, or would already want to settle in a place that you can call home but you still lack a few more funds to suffice the big purchase, you're better off exploring payment options via installment basis. This payment option in the Philippines is governed by the Republic Act number 6552 or the Realty Installment Buyer Protection Act. This is more commonly known as the Maceda law, named after the main author of this 1972 law, former Senator Ernesto Maceda. This law deals primarily with one's rights as a real estate investor or a real estate buyer paying in installments. It also describes the rights of a buyer defaulting in payments for such purchases. In a sample scenario, let's say you have opted to avail of the initial installment plan offered by a developer and a location of your choice, thinking that you could get a favored house loan for it after 2 or 3 years of building equity. Given that the odds were not mostly in your favor and your loan was not approved, you may end up defaulting, meaning you fail to meet legal obligations or conditions of a loan. This situation is one of many where Maceda law can protect your rights, and so you can also be able to stand up and dust yourself off from this dilemma. The following entails more elaboration on the scope of the law.
And who is covered under the Maceda law?
It is clearly stipulated in Section 2 of the Maceda law that the protection of buyers of real estate on installment payments against onerous and oppressive conditions is declared a public policy. The law is on the side of the home buyers should there be any misdemeanor committed on the side of the developer or seller. So one who has paid at least 2 years of installments in all transactions or contracts involving the sale or financing of real estate on installment payments. Under Section 3, properties covered include residential condominiums, apartments, houses, townhouses, and house and lots, among others, but excluding industrial lots, commercial buildings, and sales of properties to existing tenants. Next is one who has purchased any of the properties I've just said, but who has paid less than 2 years of installments, and this is under Section 4. Therefore, if the contract is cancelled, the seller shall refund to the buyer the cash surrender value of the payments on the property, which is equivalent to 50% of the total payments made. After 5 years of installments, an additional 5% for every year of payments will be added, but not to exceed 90% of the total payments made. For this to apply, the actual cancellation of the contract must take place 30 days after receipt by the buyer of the notice of cancellation. This notice of cancellation or a demand for rescission at that must be by a notarial act and upon the full payment of the aforementioned cash surrender value to the buyer. You know, Ms. Vanessa, in times of crisis, say a pandemic, where you probably want to hold on to cash as much as possible, the Maceda law, according to property experts, grants 2 months of grace period if you've finished 2 years of installment payments. So, it's worth taking advantage of this temporary break from obligations to seriously think through the decision of cancellation. However, if you've taken the time to consider things and would still like to proceed with canceling the contract, you can secure 50% of what you paid as a refund as long as you've paid 2 years worth of installment payments.
What if the buyer have just paid less than 2 years of installments?
That's a good question. You are still primarily given the upper hand in this scenario, since grace periods and notarized notices should be given to you. In Section 4, it is highlighted that the buyer is entitled to a grace period of not less than 60 days. This is counted from the date the installment became due. The seller, on the other hand, is entitled to the cancellation of the contract if the buyer fails to pay the installments due at the end of the grace period. Now, the seller, however, must first notify the buyer of the cancellation or of the demand for rescission of the contract. This notice or demand must be by a notarial act and shall only render the cancellation or rescission effective 30 days after such notice or demand has been made.
Does the Maceda law apply when buyers pay through a housing loan from a bank?
You know, Miss Vanessa, this is where the common misconception usually lies in terms of the coverage of the Maceda law. To provide a quick background, developers nowadays merely require that the buyer pay a down payment, which constitutes a percentage of the purchase price. The remaining balance would then often be shouldered by a financing scheme, usually a housing loan, that may be provided by commercial banks, the Pag-ibig Fund, by the developers themselves through their in-house financing schemes, or by other financing institutions. Therefore, if you are taking a housing loan from a financial institution like a bank, like most people do, this means that the balance that you have to pay the real estate developer has already been paid for in full by the bank through the loan. In other words, you, in essence, have already paid the purchase price in full by availing of the loan. The subsequent monthly payments you now make to the bank are not to pay for the balance of the purchase price, but for the loan itself, the interests accruing on the principal loan, and the charges that may be or may have been incurred. Hence, having been fully paid insofar as the purchase price is concerned, the only balance you are liable for is that of the loan. And since you are not exactly paying in installments anymore, considering that the property is technically fully paid for, RA 6552 or the Maceda law would no longer apply in this situation. So, on this note, going back to the loan, as a security for the loan, parties can secure payment through the execution of what we call an REM or a real estate mortgage. This is the reason why buyers receive a notice of foreclosure in some instances because the mortgagee, referring to the financial institution, exercises its right to foreclose the REM upon the buyer's default as the mortgager.
With that, thank you very much, Mr. Kim Ochoa, for sharing your knowledge with us. It is truly an honor for us to have you here as our special guest in Resus. Before we conclude our interview, do you have any words for our Resus team who is watching now?
Well, all I can say is that I hope you guys learned a lot from our interview today, and I hope to see you guys soon next time.
Wonderful message, Mr. Kim, and wishing you all the success. I'm Vanessa, and this has been your Resus Property Consultancy Training video.